Hi, welcome. My name is Jonathan Teghtmeyer. I'm the Associate Coordinator of Communications for the Alberta Teachers Association, and we're here with ATA President Jason Schilling for a year-end discussion to talk about 2021, the year that was, and some of our expectations and issues and educational topics that we're going to be talking about and looking into going into 2022. Thank you very much, President Schilling.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, for having me here.
So let's start by looking at the year that went behind us. One of the first things I think that when we go back to maybe January, pension fight was at the top of the list. And shortly into the start of January, the Alberta Teachers Association launched a lawsuit against the government in regards to pension. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened and where that's at now?
Yeah, definitely. So in January, we found out about the ministerial order that was signed by Minister Taves at the time that said that essentially put the investment management agreement into play between ATRF and AIMCO. We know that deliberations and conversations around what the IMA would look like between AIMCO and the ATRF had fallen apart through the fall and into the early part of December. And so the minister stepped in to sign this ministerial order. Part of that ministerial order took away the strategic investment control from ATRF, or it gave AIMCO essentially a veto over that. So ATRF could say, we want this done. AIMCO could say, no, we don't want to do that. And then they could veto it, which is something that went against what MLAs had been telling teachers at the beginning of Bill 22. So Provincial Executive Council at our January meeting decided to launch a lawsuit against the ministerial order. That went into play and the wheels started rolling around that. We had a member along with the association, Greg Meeker, sign on to the legal papers, and then I created an affidavit and signed an affidavit that submitted that along from what I've heard from members and my concerns, as well as a member who pays into ATRF on those concerns. This went through the legal steps through the course of the spring and into the summer, and then there was a court case that was held at the beginning of September, and so our case was heard. In the interim, ATRF and AIMCO were still working on the agreement to see if they could come to some conclusion or some understanding, which they did roughly around the same time, interestingly, as the court case. And essentially, at the end of the day, the investment management agreement between ATRF and AIMCO was satisfactory to ATRF. It gave us back strategic control. It took away that veto power from AIMCO in a sense that what they had earlier with the ministerial order. And so we withdrew our legal case because we seemed to come to a conclusion on that was beneficial for everybody. And that was a great victory for teachers, because through the entire time, teachers who are retired, who are active, everyday citizens kept up advocacy on this issue with MLAs. And it was really through the hard work of teachers, the association, the Alberta Retired Teachers Association, putting that pressure on MLAs that we saw a favorable outcome.
And has the pension issue now been, completely resolved? Would there be any outstanding concerns for teachers in the association?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we would have to have seen Bill 22, which required ATRF to put their investment management into the hands of AIMCO, not happen. I'd love to see that bill rescinded and just go back to the way that it was, because essentially, as we said around this time, what is broken that we're fixing here? And, you get the talking points for government saying, oh, we're going to save some money on the plan for teachers and the government. Well, the plan was very much successful in the way that it was operating at the time. And so that was a very thin argument on that part. Ultimately, that's what I would love to see. We're still doing work on that. But now that we have an investment management agreement that is extremely satisfactory for ATRF and for AIMCO, and that's working forward, we need to make sure that we keep that in place so that we see good investments for our pension plan, but also still working to try to regain that control back.
And can you speak to the degree to which having the teachers involved and being such strong advocate ultimately helped get that agreement with ATRF?
The teachers were relentless on their pursuit around the pension issue. So we had a hands off our pension.ca, which generated tens of thousands of emails that went to MLAs, highlighting teachers' concerns around Bill 22 and the ministerial order. When they were starting to get form letters back, we then said, okay, well, let's break through those forms, ask them specific questions about that. And then teachers did. They made appointments to meet their MLAs. They wrote letters. They made phone calls. They did not give up on this issue. And we know that advocacy sometimes can be kind of a long road. It's not a sprint. I always say it's a marathon. And this has definitely been a marathon if you think from the October 2019, when we first learned about Bill 22, to January, June, July, September of 2021. There's a long time to keep advocacy up on an issue, and that goes all of that, the praise and the congratulations goes to teachers on that, because they kept that moving forward.
So moving forward into the year, we end up, I think the next big thing is looking at March, and the minister announces that she has a draft for the K-6 curriculum and puts it out publicly and invites Albertans to offer their feedback. What did teachers say when they saw that K-6 draft curriculum?
It was a resounding no thank you. When it first came out, the same day that the curriculum was announced, the association actually launched a website, a critical analysis website for teachers to go in to look at their subject areas, look at the curriculum as a whole, analyze it, do a comparison for what they're doing now to what you would see within the document. And teachers could not believe what they were seeing. And you have to recall that throughout this entire process, the association and teachers have essentially not been at the creation of this curriculum from the get-go. This comes from the summer of 2019, when the minister tore up a member of understanding between the association and the government of Alberta as full partners on curriculum development. Teachers were removed from that table, and this is what we saw come out in March, and it was completely unacceptable. It was age inappropriate. It's grade inappropriate. It doesn't scaffold through the grades. You have concepts brought down from junior high into elementary school without any bridging between those concepts. A lot of teachers I talked to said they looked at this curriculum and thought, where's the joy of learning and teaching in here? How are we going to have kids love school and not be confused, especially in like math, where you have these concepts that don't line up in a way that makes sense for students? And it was very rote. There's a lot of memorization. There was very little asking the student, why are you learning this? It was just, you need to learn this, but no reason as to why. And when you look at the entire K-6 draft curriculum, critical thinking is mentioned once. And I think that is a huge indication of what this curriculum is like. And of course, social studies took a lot of attention and energy, as it should. It was outdated. It was racist in areas. It had students learning a lot of American history, and teachers just were hands down, no, thank you. We do not want this. We do not support this. Our surveys of members said 91% or 93% of teachers didn't support it. They were unhappy with it. 95% of school administrators did not want to see it in their schools and their community. And that is a huge number that says the ministry got this wrong.
Do you think if the ministry had involved teachers more in the drafting, that these mistakes would have been made?
No. You have to see from the history of curriculum development in Alberta, teachers have always been involved for decades before, regardless of who's in power at that time politically. And curriculum shouldn't really be a politicized process. It should be something that is done by professionals and experts in the field who are active teachers working in classrooms, because teachers know what's going to work in their classroom and what's not. And when they looked at this curriculum, they're like, I cannot see how this works. It's an entirely different way of teaching as well. It's more of a perennial style, and as opposed to how we work now with students. And that is a huge factor as well, because it not only affects those working in classrooms, but it also affects our pre-service programs. So if teachers had been at that table, if the association had been at that table working with government, as we have been in the past, we wouldn't have seen such a flawed document that's destined for failure.
So sticking with the curriculum thing, although we jump a bit, around the calendar, we we know that the minister has said, and the ministry has said, well, teachers were involved. We had 100 teachers involved in the curriculum working group, and they offered feedback. They were consulted on this. So you can't say that teachers weren't consulted on this. What would be your reaction to the minister on that point?
I would say that it wasn't an authentic consultation. And I also would like to say that consultation is not endorsement. So to say, well, we had 100 teachers look at this and they, so what are you complaining about? That consultation doesn't mean they endorsed what they saw. And we've since seen an open letter to Albertans by several of the teachers who were involved in this process, detail what the process was like. And having spoke to them, they had 2 days. The first morning was wrought with technical issues. They couldn't see the document. And we're talking about hundreds of pages of curriculum that teachers were asked to look at in a day and a half. We know that the input and the feedback that they gave on this document was not reflected in the document that came out. And that letter was very clear that this process was not something that was authentic. It felt like it was more of a, let's just check the box and have that taken care of and say that we consulted teachers, when in fact, the teachers who were involved in that process did not feel like their expertise was taken for value.
So more recently, we've now had some piloting in the schools. We know that there was a lot of school boards that didn't want to pilot, but there were some that did. I think the ministry talks about 300 teachers across the province who have started piloting it. What are your reactions to the piloting process? What are your observations about how that's gone?
Well, when you look at the curriculum as a whole, I'm going to back it up just a second here as well. I mean, part of the problem is the content of the curriculum. The other part is the process, including the field testing. So as the curriculum was announced in March, we kept asking questions about field testing. What's that going to look like? Who's going to be involved? What kind of resources are going to be involved in both English and in French? What kind of professional development will we have for teachers, knowing that this is a completely different style, a completely different curriculum? And we have some teachers who are going to be teaching, these teach split grades. They're going to be doing a lot of this. No clear answers, especially around assessment as well, was a big factor there. So from what I understand from the field testing, it goes from September to February. So it's not even the entire curriculum will be field tested. Not every subject or grade is being field tested right now. No one's touched social studies. Nobody is looking at that. So how do you implement something in the fall for everybody to use that has not been authentically and thoroughly tested in the field by teachers to see if it works? There's very little discussion about the creation of resources. It's sort of a, let's make it up as we go along. And that's not necessarily good because it causes a lot of stress for teachers and students when you're trying to work through this. And from what I understand, the teachers who are doing this, they're having a lot of concerns about the curriculum that they've been working with.
So most recently, the minister has said she's going to set aside the implementation on subjects like fine arts, social studies, science, that the social studies is going to be reassessed and there's going to be not necessarily completely back to the drawing board, but they've come out with some changes to the scope and sequence, and it looks like they're going to be redrafting at least the primary program of studies. But in the meantime, language arts and math and phys ed and wellness, subjects that maybe enjoyed more support, are going to move forward in September. Was this the right move?
No, what they need to do is a complete moratorium on this. We cannot put something that is not ready or prepared. And we know that anything that's implemented, it was still going to need some working in the fall, but this is not ready at all. There are still several issues with the English language arts program. There's still issues with the mathematics program that hasn't been addressed. And we know that with wellness and with phys ed, there are some issues there that we need to see specifically just how they're going to update and change that, because there were concerns there, especially around wellness, body image and other things in there, that have concerns from people who teach those subjects out there.
And what do you think about the notion that there'd be any implementation on September 1st? What does that mean for teachers?
Well, there's no indication from government, and we're at the end of December going into 2022. You only have 5-6 months till the end of the school year, and then the start of the school year after that. Again, no resources that are available right now to assist that. They're still in development. No real clear indication of professional development needs for teachers and other support staff who are going to be working with the students. And that also includes university programs, pre-service programs that will be teaching teachers how to teach, still need to see this as well. And there's very little conversation around assessment. And what we've seen happen through the fall, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic, a lot of assessment being done around literacy and numeracy with a program from the government, but also school boards have been doing their own assessment. And from what I'm hearing from teachers, over assessing students at this point. So there's a lot of questions about what will assessment look like in the fall if we're going to be truly assessing our students for what they learn, or is it just going to be, here's a bunch of standardized tests that we can have you do, because we know that that's not really an authentic way to assess what students are learning on a day-to-day basis in classrooms.
So while all this is going on, as you mentioned, the pandemic continues to rage and schools continue to operate in the spring of 2021 with that third wave really on the rise. What were you hearing from teachers at that point, and what was your assessment of, how COVID was going in schools?
Working with the government, or essentially trying to work with the government through COVID and around COVID protocols within schools, has been extremely frustrating. The association has been doing throughout the entire pandemic what we call our pulse surveys to get a sense of how teachers are experiencing COVID within their classrooms and what their feelings are during the pandemic, seeing high levels of stress, exhaustion, fatigue at the end of the day, a lot of concerns about students' mental health, teachers' own mental health, concerns about the impacts on administrators who've had to pick up the lion's share of contact tracing that's been dropped by Alberta Health Services. There's a lot of stress in the system. And then last year was a lot of roller coaster of you're in class, COVID cases, now we're online. And we saw the start of the school year in January where everybody was online for several weeks because there was a spike in cases. When we get to the summer, and we have the announcement in mid-June of the best summer ever. And then the school plan came out at the end of June, which basically was a return to normal. It was an endemic approach to school in the middle of a pandemic, which caused a lot of people to criticize that approach because we essentially were dropping a lot of the protocols. Through the summer, you also saw the government drop the idea that they were going to test, isolate, and do contact tracing, which was extremely concerning for not only medical experts, but teachers. And these announcements are coming in the summer when teachers are exhausted and parents are exhausted and students are tired from the year before that they might have missed it, right? Because they were just trying to rest and recover from the year before. So when we saw the document come out in August from the government, essentially the minister and the government abdicated their leadership and their responsibility onto school boards. So we had inconsistent messages on masking. We had inconsistent messages on what were the protocols going to school. Some schools had different guidelines and different rules and different protocols that were across the street from one another. And this caused a lot of confusion for parents and for students and for teachers. And for the first time in my life, I've ever seen this happen at school boards. You saw protests of school boards that were implementing mask mandates for their students because they were doing what they felt the government should have been doing by putting in protocols to make sure that they're keeping students and staff as safe as possible at school.
So similar to that, we had some school boards decide that they were going to implement measures requiring staff to have been vaccinated in order to work in schools. And I know that the association had a bit of role in that and put out a policy statement. How do you think that's gone?
Well, again, and this is an issue, masking, vaccines, that's been polarized and politicized when it shouldn't have been. These are tools that we have available to us to make sure that we are keeping students and staff safe. And with vaccines, with 12 and up, it allows those who are working in the building or attending schools at that point to make sure that we're vaccinated to help protect those who are under the age of 11. So our elementary school students who cannot be vaccinated at that time. And we saw through the numbers through the fourth wave of the fall, we're one of the largest groups to have their numbers go up in terms of COVID infections. So the vaccine mandate that came out from some school boards the association had put out a policy that said, we want to see the following things happen in order for us to be supportive of this vaccine mandate. If not, then we would represent our members who were opposed to it and work through the challenges of that. So it had to be accommodating. There had to be room for tests. It couldn't be punitive. And we've seen, with everything else, there was some blowback on the association. I got a lot of very interesting emails from individuals on their opinions about that, but always encourage them to work with their employer, work with the association to find a resolution to the end that was acceptable for everybody, knowing that it's not going to be acceptable for everybody. So it's been a challenge for sure.
Are you happy then with how that whole issue has ended and sort of how it evolved?
Well, when you look at our last pulse survey, we asked our teachers about vaccines and whether or not they had been vaccinated or had indications to be vaccinated. And about 95% of teachers had indicated that they had already had their 2 shots or they had their booster shot from that point on. So pleased to see the huge uptake on vaccines for teachers, and the ones who weren't able to do it for a variety of reasons, we've been able to try to work with them as much as we can.
So another significant event from 2021 was our annual Representative Assembly in May. And I think when we look at these issues of COVID, maybe the fight over pension, which wasn't necessarily directly related to Minister LaGrange, but COVID and curriculum, maybe funding and class size concerns as well. Teachers at ARA ultimately decide to vote 99% in favor of a non-confidence motion against the minister. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's only happened in my recollection twice in the association history. The previous vote of non-confidence in the Minister of Education was with Jeff Johnson around the Task Force of Teaching Excellence. This conversation that we had in May at ARA, and this was held virtually for the safety of everybody who was involved, the debate around the motion of non-confidence in the minister was one that really showed the pressures within the system. I've never seen teachers be so raw and honest and forthright about their experiences and their concerns for their students and for each other. And it was really important when we listened to the conversation that that's where teachers were. They were concerned about their students and each other. It wasn't, anything that was self-serving. It was very much, we are afraid right now, and we do not feel supported by this government or the choices that the Minister of Education was making. So when that vote came, 99% in favor, and we delivered that message to the minister about this concern and said, these are the things that teachers are telling you. These are the things that I've been telling you in meetings that I've relayed from our membership, because members of Provincial Executive Council, local presidents, teachers tell me these are their concerns. I relay this to the minister in meetings, and it, and sometimes am dismissed by it. And to have teachers then say, we have no confidence in the work that you're doing, was really quite profound. And then at ARA, they also followed it up with subsequent resolutions saying, we have no confidence in this curriculum, and we want a moratorium on that. And so I think you had a double whammy of non-confidence votes there.
And so what has the fallout been? I know that some people were concerned that, by passing the motion that you would end up cutting off, any ability to sort of talk with the minister and move things forward. What has been the fallout, and what did the summer and fall look like as a result?
Well, I mean, it's not good for the relationship, right? Which I guess it ultimately is fine, right? I'm here to advocate for teachers and for students and for public education. I'm not here to placate the minister. I'm not here to, just tell it everything's fine and give the good side of everything. I want to give as honest of an opinion about what teachers are telling me when I meet with the ministry. We've yet to have a meeting with the minister about curriculum. We've given our analysis document. We've asked several times. I've always been told too busy. And
so you haven't had a meeting with the minister about curriculum with all that's gone on and the degree to what she said that she would, talk to stakeholder groups in the ATA. When was the last time you talked to her about curriculum?
One-on-one with the minister would be in February of 2021. Now, the letter
Wow.
that is part of the curriculum analysis group, when it first came out, we said to the minister, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time giving you ways to improve a curriculum that cannot be improved. You need to stop, put it to a side and start again with teachers, with academics, with Indigenous communities, Francophone communities, 2S LGBTQ plus communities represented in the process. We weren't going to try to polish this up, if you will. And that was misunderstood, saying, well, we don't want to give you our opinion. So we gave the analysis, and the minister was like, oh, this is great. Well, thank you for that. And I actually asked for a meeting so that we could sit down and go over it, so we could highlight things within the document, and have yet to have a meeting around that.
All right, moving ahead into the fall, collective bargaining got underway after significant delay. We know that there was efforts throughout the 2021 school year to come up with the list of all matters that would determine whether issues were central or local. Ultimately, that took a lot longer, and elements of it had to be referred for arbitration. The arbitrator came back. Can you speak to us a little bit about the decision of the arbitrator, and then what happened with collective bargaining then afterwards?
Yeah, collective bargaining has been a factor throughout the entire year. It's also one of those things that we don't tend to talk about within the media. We want bargaining to happen at the bargaining table, and we try not to bargain in the media because it tends to add bias to the whole conversation. So with the list of all matters to be bargained, that had to go to arbitration, which it did, which helped set the stage for collective bargaining. And through the course of the year, we've been doing surveying with members about what their expectations are, what they would like to see in a new collective agreement. That had to happen a couple of times. We did that a couple of times through the pandemic, because what the ask was before the pandemic and during the pandemic shifted a little bit, because the sand under everybody's feet shifted a little bit. And we also saw local bargaining become problematic in the spring as well, where I think we had 4 or 5 locals get to the authorization of a strike vote trying to settle their own local bargaining. That was settled and taken care of, luckily without any kind of job action. And now we're in the bargaining process into the fall. It's been a little bit slow and delayed because of the pandemic, and that's okay, because it gives us time to make sure that we're prepared and we're ready, and that we know what teachers are looking for as we move forward with that.
Okay, and moving deeper into the fall now, in the legislative session, we had the Students First Act. Can you tell us a little bit about that legislation?
Yeah, so this is Bill 85, came down and was put in the legislature around concerns that the minister was having in terms of teacher discipline. Now, this is something that staff had actually been talking with government for a while, because we've been looking at our own teacher discipline process and looking for ways to modernize it and update it to make sure that we are doing the best that we can to ensure the public that we're holding our members to account when it comes to their professionalism. There have been some conversations there around that. Bill 85 came out. There's a registry there, which is similar to what other professions have, which actually, when you look at some of the detail that'll be put there, will actually give us some information about the minister's own process, because the association will do teacher discipline for members who are members of the association. But for those teachers who are working out in schools in Alberta who are not members of the ATA, they're disciplined under the registrar's office. Those are not released. Those findings of those reports are not released publicly. You can't find them anywhere. They don't have public hearings, where the association does. So Bill 85 actually brought the minister's process up to the same standard of scrutiny and rigor that the association had. And I thought that was a good thing, because it's quite often done in a way that we don't get to see what the outcome of those cases are. And when we're working, and it's something the association takes very seriously, to ensure the public that teachers are being held to this high standard, to not see that from the minister's side, but now to see it would be a good thing.
But then after Bill 85 was passed, the minister announced that she needs to take it a step further and announces that she'll be removing the discipline functions from the association. Why do you think she did that?
I think it's purely political, quite honestly. As I said before, we've been having conversations around teacher discipline with department staff. And this had not come up at all once in these discussions. And so to have this happen after the sitting, after a very controversial sitting of the legislature and the passing of Bill 81 at 3:00 in the morning, the next thing we have this announcement by the minister on the heels of this curriculum failure that is going on, COVID in schools, and other issues around funding, a lot of concerns about there. It really came off looking like it was a distractionary attempt to get us off of the focus of the concerns that teachers have and parents have: curriculum, funding, COVID. And it just seemed like it was a pure political move, especially when every opportunity to have a conversation around concerns with the association, with myself, with staff could have happened, didn't. It was just a blindside in the media the day after. And it was an unfortunate, and it angered a lot of teachers. You have a lot of teachers right now who feel disrespected by this government, who feel demoralized by this government and the choices that they make and the attacks that they have on the profession. And then to attack their professional teaching association in the way that was done on December 9th was really hurtful to a lot of teachers across this province.
Well, what's the big deal? The minister and others would suggest that the ATA has a conflict of interest, being both the union and the disciplinary body for teacher conduct. Why should teachers and parents care about this element of the system that seems to be relatively minor in scope in terms of how many teachers it affects?
Well, this is something that the association has been doing for over 86 years. It's always had a union, a regulatory, and a professional function. And structures have been put in place to keep them separate. They also work sometimes in tandem, professional side, union side, PD for teachers would be a good example. When it comes to discipline, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So for instance, I keep seeing in the media that the ATA defends teachers in conduct hearings. We don't. The teacher is responsible for their own defense. We prosecute teachers according to our code of conduct and the legislation that is behind that. So there's some misinformation out there as well that needs to be clarified. And it's important for teachers and parents to know about this, because we have a history over 86 years, 100 years of the association being around, where you have collegiality, a unified profession in this sense, a culture within our schools and our buildings that had been built over decades and decades of time that makes Alberta one of the best performing education systems in the world. You ruin that culture and you break apart the association that strives day in and day out to do what's best for students and teachers in this province. You ruin that culture. It will take years for that culture to be rebuilt. And I don't want to see a dismantling of a public education system that I care about in this province and be divided up potentially into a more privatized kind of way.
So looking back on all that was in 2021, what would you say has been the most dominant challenge or what has been the most significant event even of 2021?
I don't know if I could say what would be the one most significant event. As I talk to teachers in presentations, I've been doing the Sesame Street. These things brought to you by the letter C, right? So COVID, curriculum, collective bargaining. I haven't been able to work the pension one into the C word yet, but I just, there's a lot there. This has been a very challenging year for teachers, for the association, for members of Provincial Executive Council and the ATA staff. I keep a list every year of the number of things that we've talked about in the media or have had, issues we've had to work with. And I'm at 56 for the year, and that's a lot. And there was 56 the year before and 52 the year before that. There's a lot of things that are being done in education, to educators, to teachers, and we'll keep advocating for that. I think the biggest challenge probably for this last year, I would just say, is the energy to keep it up, because there's a lot. And I know that sometimes when you're advocating and you're pushing for things, people that you might be advocating towards, so for instance, the government on curriculum, There's a lot of work there. As I said earlier, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to keep that energy up. And the other side just figures if we can ignore you long enough, you'll go away. But we're not going away. The association won't go away. We're resolved to do the work for our members and for our students in public education in this province. And it just like everybody else working and living in a pandemic, we're all exhausted, but we still keep going and we keep that resolve up because it's important and it matters.
So going into 2022, what must the priority for teachers in the association be?
Well, I think the first thing that is going to be a priority is to ensure that the association stays intact the way that it is right now. We need to make sure that we defend public education, which means that we defend our association and we defend our profession. We have a large, we have 46,000 members in this province, and there's parents and there's teachers and students. I hear from them all the time about their concerns of public education, and we have to keep advocating for it or fighting for it. I know I don't try to use that battle language too much, but I choose those words carefully, and fighting for this is important. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately about fighting against something. We're fighting against the people, the government on curriculum. I'm not fighting against something. I'm fighting for something. I'm fighting for public education. I'm fighting for my students and for my colleagues who are working in schools right now in conditions that are not ideal and can be improved if they only had the political will to do it. And I think that's important that we keep fighting for the things that we value as we move forward into 2022.
It sounds a lot like 2022 is going to start in a very similar fashion to how 2021 did.
Yeah, it might. And that's okay. We're prepared. We're prepared to do that work. That is the work that we do here at the association. That's the work that staff do. That's the work that Provincial Executive Council does. It's the work that local presidents and school reps do. We're all in this together. And I know that's become a bit of a cliche throughout the pandemic to say, oh, we're all in it together. And people are like, just shut up. I don't want to hear about that right now. But we are. Right? I don't do this by myself. I do this with 46,000 other colleagues across this province, and we all need to, make that time and do the best that we can in terms of advocating for the things that we value and that we believe in.
Anything else you'd like to add, Jason?
The only thing I would say, because this is the end of the year interview, is that it has been a challenging year. And I recognize that for my colleagues who might be watching and for their families and for, even you, Jonathan, it's been a challenge for you working, from home and with little kids who are in schools and the concerns around COVID and how that works and their learning and everything that we've been talking about is an effect for you as well. And for people who are watching. I cannot thank teachers enough. I can't thank them enough for the resiliency, for the fact that they have essentially kept education afloat in this province during a pandemic, and it's been exhausting and it's been challenging. But I sometimes talk to teachers and they say, we've had some really good moments too this last year. I get to work with my students. I get to still see them on a day-to-day basis if we weren't quarantined in the spring like we were. Lots of challenges, lots of things that we need to face, and we'll do that, together and strengthen solidarity. Because as we've been saying recently with collective bargaining, you might see the little pins. I should have one on now, but I don't have it with me because I gave them all away. But it says we are ATA, and we are we are a profession that work together. And so I know we're at the end of 2021, and 2022 will be a year that is challenging and will unfold in front of us, and we'll take those challenges as they come. And I just want to wish everybody a happy holiday. And I hope that you find time to rest and relax, but I also want you to find time to celebrate the year that was, the work that you did, and the fact that you did an outstanding job in some of the most challenging circumstances that our profession has ever faced.
I think that's a great note to finish on. I think, Jason, a lot of teachers would also thank you for the leadership and the advocacy that you've provided over this very challenging year as well. Thank you very much, President Schilling, for your time. Thanks to everyone who watched at home, and I would echo what Jason said. Have a happy holidays and a good break. Yeah. See you in 2022.